Derek Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he adjusted the massive steel beams on the construction site. 22 years ago, he'd started Morrison Steelworks with nothing but a pickup truck, a welding kit, and an iron will that his late father had hammered into him in the coal mines of West Virginia. Now, at 45, he owned the largest custom steel fabrication company in 3 states, employing over 200 people and holding contracts that made millionaires nervous. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd built his empire with the same hands that Linda Ashford had once found so ruggedly appealing when they'd met at a charity gala 15 years ago. Back then, she was 25, fresh out of law school and rebellious enough, despite her old money family, to marry a blue-collar entrepreneur. Her father, Robert Ashford, had built his fortune in banking and real estate development, the kind of generational wealth that looked down on anyone who actually got their hands dirty for a living. Derek had been 30, hungry and foolish enough to believe that love could bridge the gap between Linda's manicured world and his calloused reality. The wedding had been a spectacle, the Ashford family's way of showing they could make even a working man's wedding look respectable. But Derek had paid for every cent of it himself, a matter of pride that Robert Ashford had mocked privately to his circle. The early years had been good. Linda had genuinely supported Derek's growing business, even working as his company's legal counsel until their son Tyler was born 10 years ago, followed by their daughter Emma 7 years later. But as Morrison Steelworks grew more successful, Linda grew more distant. She developed expensive tastes, joined exclusive country clubs, and slowly began treating Derek less like a husband and more like a source of funding for her increasingly lavish lifestyle. Derek noticed the changes but had been too focused on expanding his business to address them directly. Linda's complaints became more frequent about his long hours, his uncouth business associates, his preference for steakhouses over 5-star restaurants. She started taking separate vacations with the children, visiting her family in the Hamptons, while Derek worked contracts that kept the money flowing. The real turning point had come 6 months ago when Linda suggested they hire a family lawyer to organize their assets better. Brad Kellerman was everything Derek wasn't. Ivy League educated, smooth-talking, from a family that had never known want. He drove a BMW, wore suits that cost more than most people's monthly salary, and had the kind of confident smirk that made Derek's fists itch. But Linda had insisted Brad was the best, and Derek had agreed, trusting his wife's judgment. What Derek hadn't known was that Linda and Brad had been college sweethearts, separated when Brad had chosen law school over marriage. Their professional relationship had rekindled old feelings, and Derek had been funding his own heartbreak for months, paying Brad's retainer fees while the man planned to steal his wife and half his company. The signs had been there, of course. Linda's sudden interest in yoga classes that lasted 3 hours. Her new wardrobe of clothes she claimed were gifts from her sister. The way she'd started criticizing everything about Derek, his table manners, his choice of friends, even the way he played with their children. She'd grown cold in bed, claiming stress and fatigue while secretly planning her escape. Robert Ashford's involvement had been the final insult. The old man had never accepted Derek as family, viewing him as a temporary embarrassment that Linda would eventually outgrow. When Linda had confided her plans to divorce Derek, Robert had enthusiastically supported the idea, even offering to finance the legal battle to ensure Linda got what she deserved. Today's barbecue was supposed to be a celebration of Tyler's 10th birthday, but Derek now understood it was actually Linda's farewell performance. She'd invited her entire family, her parents, Robert and Margaret, her sister Claire with her husband Philip, and even her pompous Uncle Charles, who never missed an opportunity to remind Derek of his humble origins. Derek had spent the morning preparing Tyler's favorite meal, perfectly grilled ribeye steaks with his secret sauce recipe, corn on the cob, and homemade potato salad. He'd been looking forward to a rare family gathering where he could actually relax and enjoy his children's company. Tyler had been excited all week, and Emma had helped Derek prepare the marinade, her small hands carefully measuring spices under his guidance. But as Derek stepped into the kitchen to retrieve the sauce he'd spent years perfecting, a blend of bourbon, brown sugar, and spices that had become legendary among his business associates, he heard Robert Ashford's voice cutting through the evening air like a blade. "He's a good cook. I'll give him that," Robert was saying to Linda, their voices carrying clearly through the open kitchen window. "But this man is dead weight, Linda. You need to leave him before he drags us all down. You're too good for this pretense of happiness." Derek had frozen, the glass jar of sauce in his hand, as Linda's reply hit him like a physical blow. "Don't worry, Dad. The lawyer is filing Monday. Brad says we can take half of his company, too. He's been documenting everything. Derek's questionable business practices, his unstable temperament. We'll paint him as an unfit father and a dangerous business partner. By the time we're done, he'll be lucky to get weekend visitation and a monthly check." The casual cruelty in Linda's voice was what broke something inside Derek. Not anger. He had learned to control that years ago in business negotiations. This was something colder, more calculating. The same methodical thinking that had built his empire from nothing was now turning its full attention to the people who thought they could destroy him. Derek walked back outside with a smile, serving the steaks he'd prepared with love to people who saw him as nothing more than a target to be taken down. He watched Tyler blow out his candles, listened to Emma's excited chatter about her upcoming school play, and made polite conversation with in-laws who were quietly celebrating his impending downfall. But behind his calm exterior, Derek Morrison was planning. And when Derek Morrison planned, mountains moved. Derek's smile never wavered as he served the perfectly grilled steaks. Each piece was cut to individual preferences he'd memorized over years of family gatherings. Robert Ashford preferred his well done, despite Derek's gentle suggestions that it ruined the meat. Margaret wanted medium rare but complained if she saw any pink. Linda liked hers medium, though she barely touched her food lately, claiming to be on some new diet that coincidentally started around the time Brad Kellerman entered their lives. "Delicious as always, Derek," Margaret said with the kind of forced politeness reserved for service workers. "You really should consider opening a restaurant instead of that industrial business." Derek nodded graciously, filing away another insult for future reference. Margaret Ashford had never understood that Morrison Steelworks had built the framework for half the luxury developments in the region, including the shopping complex where she spent her afternoons burning through Robert's money. As the evening progressed, Derek played the perfect host, refilling drinks and ensuring everyone was comfortable. He listened to Robert pontificate about proper business ethics and watched Brad Kellerman text constantly, probably coordinating with Linda about their Monday filing. Claire and Philip made small talk about their upcoming vacation to Europe, casually mentioning the cost in a way designed to highlight Derek's supposedly inferior financial status. But Derek's mind was elsewhere, cataloging every detail, every weakness, every pressure point he could use. Years of negotiating with suppliers, contractors, and union leaders had taught him that everyone had leverage points. You just had to know where to look. After the guests left and the children were in bed, Derek sat in his study, surrounded by the business empire he'd built through sheer determination. The walls were lined with awards, contracts, and photographs from construction sites across 3 states. His safe contained more than enough liquid assets to buy and sell the Ashford family twice over, but they'd never know that, because Derek had learned early to separate his public face from his private wealth. Linda found him there at midnight, her face flushed with wine and what Derek now recognized as excitement about her upcoming freedom. "The party was lovely," she said, perching on the edge of his desk in a way that once would have distracted him. "Tyler seems so happy." "He's a good kid," Derek replied, not looking up from the contract he was reviewing. "They both are." "Yes, well..." Linda's voice took on the carefully rehearsed tone he'd heard through the kitchen window. "Derek, we need to talk about us, about our future." Derek finally looked up, meeting her eyes with the same calm expression he wore during hostile business negotiations. "What about our future, Linda?" She faltered slightly under his steady gaze. For a moment, Derek wondered if she was having second thoughts, if some part of her remembered the woman who'd once believed in their partnership. But then, her chin lifted in the stubborn gesture he'd once found endearing. "I think we both know this isn't working," she said. "We want different things. I need more than this." "More than what, exactly?" Derek's voice remained perfectly level. "More than a successful business that employs hundreds of people. More than a home, 2 healthy children, financial security." "You know what I mean," Linda's voice sharpened. "I need intellectual stimulation, cultural engagement. Someone who understands my background, my needs." Derek nodded slowly, as if considering her words seriously. "Someone like Brad Kellerman?" The color drained from Linda's face, but Derek continued before she could respond. "I'm not angry, Linda. Disappointed? Yes. Surprised? Not really." He leaned back in his chair, studying her with the same analytical attention he gave to structural engineering problems. "What I am curious about is why you think I'd let you destroy everything I've built without a fight." "Derek, I know about the affair. I know about the divorce filing. I know about your father's financial backing and Brad's strategy to paint me as an unfit father and business partner." Derek's voice remained calm, but Linda took an involuntary step backward. "What I don't understand is why you think I'm the same naive 30-year-old who was grateful for your family's approval." Linda's mouth opened and closed without sound. Derek stood, moving around the desk with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent decades working with dangerous machinery. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, his voice gentle but carrying the same authority that commanded construction sites and boardrooms. "You're going to call Brad tomorrow and tell him you've changed your mind about the divorce. You're going to convince your father that we're working on our marriage, and you're going to buy me time to prepare my own response to your little conspiracy." "You can't. I can't." "What?" Derek stepped closer, and Linda saw something in his eyes that made her remember why other businessmen spoke of Derek Morrison with a mixture of respect and fear. "I can't protect my children from a mother who's planning to use them as weapons. I can't defend the company I built from people who think my work is beneath their notice. I can't ensure that people who betray my trust face consequences." Linda pressed herself against the bookshelf, suddenly understanding that she'd drastically underestimated the man she'd been married to for 15 years. "Derek, please. The children." "The children are my primary concern," Derek replied, "which is why you're going to maintain this facade until I'm ready to show everyone exactly what kind of people you and your family really are." He returned to his desk, picking up his contract as if the conversation was over. "Oh, and Linda, if you're thinking about warning Brad or your father about this conversation, remember that I know where every penny of our money is, who owes me favors, and exactly how many laws your new boyfriend has bent to build his practice. The choice is yours, but choose carefully." Linda fled the room, her designer heels clicking frantically on the hardwood floors. Derek listened to her footsteps fade, then opened his laptop and began making calls. He had 6 months of damage to undo, and a lifetime of revenge to plan. By morning, Derek had contacted 5 different private investigation firms, each with specific instructions about different aspects of his situation. He'd also reached out to certain business associates who specialized in solving problems that couldn't be handled through conventional channels. When Linda came down for breakfast, pale and shaky, Derek was already dressed for work, making pancakes for Tyler and Emma as if nothing had changed. "Daddy makes the best pancakes," Emma announced, syrup running down her chin. "He certainly does," Derek agreed, ruffling his daughter's hair. "And tonight, we're going to start working on that treehouse I promised you." Tyler looked up excitedly. "Really? With the rope ladder and everything?" "Everything," Derek confirmed, meeting Linda's terrified gaze over their children's heads. "Daddy always keeps his promises." The next 3 weeks passed in a carefully orchestrated dance of deception. Linda, terrified by Derek's calm threat, had indeed called Brad to postpone the divorce filing, claiming she needed more time to prepare emotionally. Brad had been frustrated but agreed, especially when Linda suggested they use the extra time to gather more evidence of Derek's supposed erratic behavior. What neither Linda nor Brad knew was that Derek had been busy gathering his own evidence. The private investigators he'd hired weren't just documenting the affair. They were building comprehensive profiles of everyone involved in the conspiracy against him. Marcus Flynn, Derek's oldest friend and the only person who knew the true extent of his wealth, sat across from Derek in the Morrison Steelworks office after hours. Marcus had served with Derek in the Army before Derek started his business, and their friendship was built on absolute trust and a shared understanding of what real loyalty meant. "You sure about this path, brother?" Marcus asked, reviewing the files Derek had compiled. "Once you start this kind of war, there's no going back." Derek looked out at the steel yard where massive I-beams and custom fabrications were waiting for delivery to construction sites across the region. Every piece of metal represented contracts worth millions, relationships built over decades, and trust earned through delivering impossible projects on time and under budget. "They declared war when they decided to steal my children and destroy my life's work," Derek replied. "I'm just choosing the battlefield." Marcus nodded, understanding. He'd seen Derek negotiate with union bosses who tried to shake him down, deal with suppliers who thought they could cheat him, and handle competitors who underestimated him. Derek never started fights, but he finished them. "What do you need from me?" Derek handed Marcus a manila folder. "Brad Kellerman has been living beyond his means for years. His law practice is successful, but not successful enough to support his lifestyle. The private investigators found some interesting discrepancies in his client trust accounts." "Embezzlement?" Marcus asked. "Nothing that simple." Derek's smile was sharp. "Brad's been running a side business, using his position as a lawyer to facilitate certain transactions for clients who prefer to avoid traditional banking oversight. Not technically illegal, but definitely ethically questionable. Grounds for disbarment if presented properly." Marcus whistled low. "And you're going to what, blackmail him?" "Blackmail is illegal," Derek replied. "I'm going to offer him a business opportunity that he can't refuse." The plan Derek had developed was elegant in its simplicity. Over the next month, he would manipulate Brad into a position where he'd have to choose between Linda and his career. Meanwhile, Derek would systematically isolate Linda from her support network by exposing the Ashford family's own vulnerabilities. Robert Ashford's biggest weakness was his pride and his need to maintain his family's social standing. Derek had discovered that Robert's bank was heavily leveraged in several commercial real estate projects that were struggling due to recent market changes. More importantly, Morrison Steelworks held subcontracts on 3 of those projects, giving Derek significant leverage over their completion schedules. The first phase began the following Monday. Derek arrived at his office early and called his project managers together for an emergency meeting. "Gentlemen," he announced, "we need to discuss some delays in our current projects, specifically the Ashford Commercial Development downtown, the Harborview Complex, and the Meridian Office Park." His head project manager, Tom Wilkins, looked confused. "Boss, those projects are all ahead of schedule. We've had no issues." "We're going to have issues," Derek interrupted. "Beginning today, all 3 projects are going to experience significant delays due to safety concerns and design modifications. I want a full review of every weld, every joint, every connection. If you find anything that's even marginally questionable, we stop work immediately." Tom's eyes widened with understanding. After 20 years with Morrison Steelworks, he knew Derek well enough to recognize when personal matters were affecting business decisions. "How long do you want these delays to last?" "Until I say otherwise," Derek replied. "And Tom, make sure these delays are documented properly. We need to show that Morrison Steelworks takes safety seriously, even when it costs us money." Within 3 days, Robert Ashford was fielding angry calls from developers whose projects had suddenly ground to a halt. The delays weren't Derek's fault. They were entirely legitimate safety concerns that any competent contractor would address. But the timing couldn't have been worse for Robert's bank, which had guaranteed completion bonuses that were now in jeopardy. Meanwhile, Derek put the second phase of his plan into motion. He called Brad Kellerman's office and requested a meeting to discuss expanding their legal relationship. Brad arrived at Morrison Steelworks that Friday afternoon, clearly expecting to discuss Derek's imminent divorce. Instead, Derek led him to the conference room where several contracts were waiting. "Brad, I've been thinking about our conversation regarding asset protection," Derek began, pouring coffee from an expensive service set that Linda had bought but he'd never used. "You mentioned some strategies for offshore holdings that might benefit my business expansion." Brad's eyes lit up with anticipation. The kind of money Derek was discussing would generate legal fees that dwarfed anything in Brad's current practice. "I'd be very interested in discussing those options," Brad replied, his mind already calculating commissions. Derek smiled. "Excellent. Of course, this would require absolute discretion. The kind of work where client confidentiality is paramount." "Naturally," Brad agreed. Derek slid a contract across the table. "I've prepared a retainer agreement for expanded legal services. Very generous terms, I think you'll find." Brad scanned the document, his eyes widening at the numbers. The retainer alone was more than most lawyers made in a year, and the ongoing fees would set him up for life. "This is very generous," Brad managed. "I believe in paying for the best," Derek replied. "Of course, this level of legal representation requires your complete attention. I need to know that my interests come first, ahead of any other clients or personal relationships." Brad hesitated for a moment, understanding the subtext. Derek was offering him enough money to buy his loyalty and his abandonment of Linda. "I'm sure we can work something out," Brad said finally, signing the contract. Derek shook his hand warmly. "I'm sure we can. Oh, and Brad, I'll need you to start immediately. I have some urgent matters that require your immediate attention." As Brad left the office, contract in hand, Derek made another call. This one was to Margaret Ashford's favorite charity, where Derek had just become the largest anonymous donor in the organization's history. The donation came with specific requirements about how the money should be used, requirements that would put Margaret in an impossible position when they were revealed. By the end of the week, Derek had set multiple traps in motion. Robert Ashford was scrambling to deal with construction delays that threatened his bank's stability. Brad Kellerman was now financially dependent on Derek and contractually obligated to prioritize Derek's interests. And Margaret Ashford was unknowingly involved in a charity scandal that would destroy her social standing when it became public. But Derek wasn't finished. The real masterpiece of his revenge was still being constructed, and when it was complete, everyone who had betrayed him would understand exactly what it meant to underestimate Derek Morrison. Linda, meanwhile, was growing increasingly desperate. The delays in the divorce, combined with Derek's suddenly cheerful demeanor and Brad's strange distance, had left her feeling isolated and confused. She tried to convince herself that Derek was simply accepting the inevitable, but something in his eyes told her that he was planning something far more devastating than she could imagine. She was right. 6 weeks after the barbecue, Derek's carefully laid plans began to bear fruit. The construction delays he'd orchestrated were creating a domino effect throughout Robert Ashford's financial empire. 3 major development projects were hemorrhaging money due to completion penalties, and Robert's bank was facing serious liquidity issues. Derek sat in his office reviewing the morning reports when his secretary buzzed him. "Mr. Morrison, Robert Ashford is here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's urgent." Derek allowed himself a small smile. Phase 1 was complete. "Send him in, please." Robert Ashford entered Derek's office looking older than his 68 years. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his face drawn with stress. Derek rose from behind his desk, extending his hand with false warmth. "Robert, what a pleasant surprise. Please, sit down. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" Robert remained standing, his hands clenched into fists. "Cut it, Derek. I know you're behind these delays. My projects are hemorrhaging money because your people have suddenly developed perfectionist standards they've never had before. Derek settled back into his chair, his expression one of wounded innocence. Robert, I'm hurt. Morrison Steelworks has always maintained the highest safety standards. If our thoroughness is causing delays, surely that's better than the alternative. Don't play games with me, Robert snarled. I've been in business longer than you've been alive. I know when I'm being taken advantage of. Derek's expression hardened slightly. You know, Robert, in all the years I've been married to your daughter, you've never once shown me the respect you'd give to any other successful businessman. You've treated me like hired help at family gatherings, dismissed my achievements, and made it clear that you consider me beneath your family standards. Robert shifted uncomfortably. This isn't about. This is exactly about that, Derek interrupted, his voice taking on the steel that had intimidated union bosses and corporate executives. You see, Robert, I've learned something about your family. You mistake cruelty for sophistication, entitlement for class, and manipulation for intelligence. But most importantly, you've forgotten that in the real world, actions have consequences. Derek stood and walked to his window, looking out at the steel yard where crews were working on projects that would outlast them all. Your bank guaranteed completion bonuses on those 3 projects. The penalties for delays are substantial. I estimate you're looking at approximately $12 million in immediate losses, with potential exposure reaching $25 million if the delays extend beyond 60 days. Robert's face went pale. You troublemaker. I prefer businessman, Derek replied calmly. The same quality you've been mocking for 15 years now. Those delays are entirely legitimate. My crews have identified genuine safety concerns that require immediate attention. But Derek turned back to face Robert, his expression thoughtful. But I might be able to expedite the resolution of those issues for the right considerations. Robert understood immediately. What do you want? Derek returned to his desk and pulled out a legal document. I want you to transfer 51% ownership of Ashford Development Properties to Morrison Steelworks. Call it a merger, a partnership, whatever helps you sleep at night, but I want controlling interest in your company. That's impossible. The alternative is bankruptcy, Derek said matter-of-factly. Your bank can't absorb those penalty losses, and you've leveraged your personal assets against the projects. You'll lose everything anyway. But this way you maintain some dignity and a minority stake in a company that will actually be properly managed. Robert's hands trembled with rage. Linda will never forgive you for this. Derek's smile was genuinely warm. Robert, Linda is going to have much bigger problems to worry about than your business failures. That afternoon, Derek's phone rang. It was Marcus calling from his surveillance position outside Brad Kellerman's office building. You were right, Marcus reported. Our boy Brad just received a very angry visit from a woman named Patricia Vance. Apparently, she's the wife of one of his clients whose trust account Brad has been borrowing from. She's threatening to expose him to the State Bar Association unless he returns her husband's money immediately. Derek nodded with satisfaction. Patricia Vance was actually an actress Derek had hired, and the trust account irregularities were fictional, but Brad didn't know that. Derek had spent weeks setting up an elaborate con designed to make Brad believe his illegal activities had been discovered. How did he react? He's panicking. Made 3 phone calls in the last hour, all to different banks. Looks like he's trying to liquidate assets quickly. Derek glanced at his watch. Perfect timing. Linda should be arriving at Brad's office in about 20 minutes for their regular Friday afternoon appointment. Linda had been growing increasingly frustrated with Brad's recent distance and distraction. When she demanded to know what was wrong, he claimed work stress, but refused to elaborate. Today's meeting was supposed to be their romantic reunion. Linda had booked a hotel room and planned to surprise Brad with an intimate afternoon. Instead, she arrived to find Brad's office in chaos. Legal documents were scattered across his desk. His secretary was crying, and Brad himself looked like he hadn't slept in days. What's going on? Linda demanded. Brad looked up from the papers he was frantically sorting. Linda, thank goodness. I need your help. I'm in serious trouble. What kind of trouble? Brad's explanation was a masterpiece of controlled panic. He told Linda about the trust account irregularities, fictional, The threatening client, hired actress, and the potential disbarment proceedings, non-existent, but believable. By the time he finished, Linda was pale with shock. "How much money are we talking about?" she asked. "200,000, Brad lied, following the script Derek had unknowingly provided. "I borrowed it for a real estate investment that went bad. I was planning to replace it before anyone noticed, but now..." Linda's mind raced. $200,000 would solve Brad's problem, but it was more than she had in her personal accounts. However, she did have access to other funds. "I might be able to help," she said slowly. "Derek has several accounts that I have signing authority on, business accounts with plenty of liquidity." Brad's relief was genuine, even though he didn't understand that he was walking right into Derek's trap. "Linda, you'd be saving my career, my life." What neither Linda nor Brad realized was that Derek had been recording their conversation through surveillance equipment he had installed in Brad's office weeks earlier. Every word they spoke was being captured, including Linda's offer to take money from Derek's business accounts to save her lover from a fictional crisis. That evening, Derek sat in his study reviewing the day's recordings. Linda's voice came through clearly. "I'll transfer the money tomorrow morning. Derek will never notice. The business accounts have too much activity for him to track every transaction." Derek turned off the recording and made another call. "Tom, it's Derek. I need you to call an emergency safety inspection on the Ashford projects first thing Monday morning. Every crew, every weld, every bolt, and make sure the inspectors understand that we cannot compromise on safety standards." Tom's voice carried a hint of admiration. "How long do you want this inspection to last?" "Until Robert Ashford signs my merger agreement," Derek replied, "no matter how long it takes." By Sunday evening, Derek had 3 more pieces of his revenge in place. Robert Ashford would face complete financial ruin unless he surrendered control of his company. Brad Kellerman was trapped in a web of fictional criminal liability that would force him to betray Linda to save himself. And Linda herself was about to commit actual embezzlement, a serious crime that Derek could expose at any time. But Derek's masterpiece was still incomplete. The final phase would require perfect timing and absolute ruthlessness. When it was finished, everyone who had betrayed him would understand that Derek Morrison wasn't just a good cook who worked with steel. He was a man who built things to last, including his revenge. Monday morning arrived with unseasonable cold, and Derek woke before dawn with the satisfaction of a man whose plans were falling into place. Linda had left early for her yoga class, the same fictional class that provided cover for her affair, and the children were still sleeping when Derek received the call he'd been expecting. "Mr. Morrison?" The voice belonged to Janet Mills, his head of accounting. "I need to speak with you immediately about some irregular transactions on the secondary business account." Derek feigned surprise. "What kind of irregularities?" "Someone with authorized access transferred $200,000 to an external account on Friday afternoon. The transaction was properly authenticated, but it wasn't authorized by you and it doesn't correspond to any pending contracts or payments." Derek's voice took on the appropriate tone of alarm. "I'll be right in." 20 minutes later, Derek sat in his office with Janet, reviewing bank records that showed Linda's theft in black and white. The electronic trail was perfect. Her authorization codes, her digital signature, even security camera footage of her entering the bank to facilitate the wire transfer. "Janet, I need you to prepare a complete forensic accounting report," Derek said grimly, "and call our corporate attorney. This appears to be embezzlement." Derek then made a call to Marcus. "Phase 3 is active. It's time to collect Brad Kellerman." By noon, Brad was sitting in Derek's office, sweating despite the air conditioning. Derek had summoned him for an emergency consultation about the embezzlement, and Brad had arrived expecting to provide legal advice about Linda's crime. Instead, he found himself facing Derek across a desk covered with surveillance photographs, financial records, and audio transcripts. "Brad," Derek began conversationally, "how long have you been spending time with my wife?" Brad's face went white. Derek held up a hand. "That was rhetorical. I know exactly how long. 8 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days. I know about your college history, your rekindled romance, and your plan to help Linda divorce me and take half my company. Derek slid a manila folder across the desk. I also know about the fictional trust account crisis I created to manipulate you into accepting Linda's stolen money. Brad opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were photographs of him with the actress Derek had hired to play Patricia Vance, transcripts of conversations that revealed the entire scam, and financial records showing that the crisis Brad thought he was facing didn't exist. You see, Brad, I needed Linda to commit a real crime. Adultery might be morally weak, but it's not a felony. Embezzlement, however, carries a potential sentence of 5 to 10 years in federal prison. Brad's voice was barely a whisper. What do you want? Derek leaned back in his chair, studying Brad with the same analytical attention he gave to structural engineering problems. I want you to understand the position you're in. You've accepted stolen money under false pretenses. You've conspired with my wife to defraud me of both assets and custody of my children, and you've done all of this while under contract to represent my legal interests. Derek pulled out another document. This is a sworn affidavit detailing your affair with Linda, your acceptance of embezzled funds, and your conspiracy to defraud me. All I need to do is file this with the authorities, and both you and Linda will face federal charges. Derek, please. However, Derek continued, I'm prepared to offer you a choice. You can take responsibility for your actions, return the stolen money, and disappear from our lives permanently. Or you can face the consequences of your decisions through the legal system. Brad's hands shook as he reviewed the evidence against him. Derek's case was airtight. Timestamps, surveillance footage, recorded conversations, and financial records that painted a clear picture of conspiracy and embezzlement. If I cooperate, Brad managed, what happens to Linda? Derek's smile was sharp. That depends entirely on Linda's choices, but I suspect she'll be too busy dealing with her own problems to worry about yours. Brad signed Derek's agreement within the hour. The document laid out his complete confession, his agreement to return the embezzled funds, and his sworn statement that he would have no further contact with Linda or her family. In return, Derek agreed not to press charges, provided Brad disappeared from their lives permanently. That evening, Derek arrived home to find Linda waiting in the living room, her face flushed with anger and confusion.
Derek, we need to talk, she announced. Brad has been acting strangely all day. He won't return my calls, and when I went to his office, his secretary said he'd taken an indefinite leave of absence.
Derek set down his briefcase and looked at his wife with calm interest. That's odd. I spoke with Brad this afternoon about a legal matter. He seemed fine, though he did mention something about taking some time off. Linda's eyes narrowed. What kind of legal matter? Oh, just some irregularities in our business accounts. Nothing for you to worry about. Derek walked to the bar cart and poured himself a scotch, noting how Linda's face had gone pale at the mention of account irregularities.
Derek,
Linda said carefully. What kind of irregularities? Derek turned to face her, his expression mild. Someone with authorized access stole $200,000 from our secondary business account. Very sophisticated theft. Electronic transfer, proper authentication codes, even security footage of the perpetrator entering the bank. Linda's hands began to tremble. Who would do something like that? Derek's smile was gentle, almost kind. The investigation is ongoing, but I have complete confidence that the thief will be identified and prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Federal embezzlement charges, you understand, very serious consequences. Linda stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I should check on the children. They're at Claire's house for the evening, Derek replied. I thought we should have some privacy to discuss our marriage. Linda's face crumpled as she realized the walls were closing in around her. Derek, I know about everything, Linda. Derek's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath the surface. The affair, the divorce plans, your father's involvement, the plan to destroy me and take my children, all of it. Linda sank back into her chair, tears streaming down her face. Derek, please. I can explain. No need, Derek interrupted. Your actions speak quite clearly. The question now is what happens next. Derek walked to his desk and retrieved a thick legal document. This is a divorce agreement I've prepared. Very generous terms, all things considered. You keep the house, a substantial settlement, and reasonable visitation with the children. Linda's eyes widened with desperate hope. Derek, thank you, but... However, Derek continued, these terms are contingent on your complete cooperation and confession. You'll sign a sworn statement admitting to the embezzlement, the affair, and the conspiracy to defraud me. You'll also agree to seek professional help for your issues. Linda's hope turned to horror. If I sign that confession, I'll go to prison. Derek nodded. Possibly, or the judge might consider your cooperation and impose a lesser sentence. Community service, probation, supervised visitation with the children. And if I don't sign... Derek's expression hardened. Then I file criminal charges tomorrow morning. You'll face trial with a public defender, maximum sentences, and complete loss of custody. Your father's financial empire will collapse under the investigation, and your entire family will be destroyed. Linda stared at the document, understanding that Derek had outmaneuvered her completely. Every move she'd made had been anticipated, every escape route blocked. I need time to think, she whispered. Derek checked his watch. You have until morning. The children will be home for breakfast, and I'd prefer they not see their mother arrested in front of them. As Linda fled upstairs, Derek poured another scotch and reviewed his handiwork. Robert Ashford would sign over his company rather than face bankruptcy. Brad Kellerman had already been neutralized and would never contact Linda again. And Linda herself would confess to her crimes rather than destroy their children's lives. But Derek wasn't finished. The final phase of his revenge required one more piece, a revelation that would ensure no one ever underestimated him again. Linda didn't sleep that night. Derek could hear her pacing in the guest bedroom, occasionally making quiet phone calls that always ended in frustrated silence. He suspected she was trying to reach Brad, unaware that her lover had already fled the state with Derek's signed agreement in his pocket. At 6 a.m, Derek was in the kitchen making breakfast when Linda appeared, her eyes red with exhaustion and tears. She clutched the unsigned confession in her trembling hands. I'll sign it, she whispered. But I want to see my children before. Derek nodded graciously. They'll be home in an hour. Claire is dropping them off before school. Linda collapsed into a chair, staring at the document that would destroy her life. How long have you known about the affair? Months, Derek replied, flipping pancakes with practiced ease. About the divorce plans since the barbecue. About your true character much longer than I care to admit. I just saved it. Derek interrupted, his voice not unkind but final. We both know this marriage died years ago. You just chose a particularly cruel way to bury it. When Tyler and Emma burst through the front door an hour later, chattering about their sleepover at Aunt Claire's, Linda managed to compose herself enough to hug them goodbye. Derek watched his children with fierce protective love, knowing he was doing this as much for them as for himself. After the school bus left, Linda signed the confession with a shaking hand. Derek witnessed the signature, then locked the document in his safe. Your attorney will be here at noon to begin proceedings, Derek informed her. I've arranged for temporary housing and a psychological evaluation. Complete cooperation, Linda. Any deviation from our agreement, and this confession becomes public immediately. Linda nodded numbly, understanding that Derek held her life in his hands. By 2 o'clock, Linda was gone, escorted by lawyers to a treatment facility where she would spend the next 6 months under court supervision. Derek called his office to inform them he'd be working from home for the rest of the day, then made another call to Robert Ashford. It's done, Derek said simply when Robert answered. The merger agreements are on my desk, Robert replied, his voice hollow with defeat. 51% ownership of Ashford Development properties as demanded, and the construction delays will be resolved immediately. My crews are standing by. Derek smiled. Pleasure doing business with you, Robert. Oh, and tell Margaret that her charity work has been illuminated. Derek hung up before Robert could respond, then made his final call of the day. "Marcus, it's time for the press conference." That evening, Derek stood before a room full of reporters, his expression grave, as he announced the shocking developments. Linda Morrison, wife of successful businessman Derek Morrison, had been arrested for embezzling $200,000 from her husband's company to fund an affair with her divorce attorney. The attorney, Brad Kellerman, had fled the state after confessing to his role in the conspiracy. But Derek's announcement contained one more surprise, something no one had seen coming. "I'm also announcing today," Derek continued, "that Morrison Steelworks will be expanding significantly following our merger with Ashford Development Properties. This partnership will create the largest construction and development company in the region, with projected revenues exceeding $50 million annually." The reporters erupted with questions. How had Derek discovered his wife's theft? What would happen to the children? How had he managed to acquire Ashford Development Properties so quickly? Derek answered each question with calm professionalism, painting himself as a victim who had acted decisively to protect his business and children. He expressed sadness about his wife's choices, but determination to move forward. What he didn't mention was the final twist in his revenge, the detail that would ensure his victory was complete and permanent. 3 days later, Emma Morrison sat in her father's study, helping him organize files for his expanding business empire. At 7 years old, Emma couldn't understand the complexities of adult relationships, but she knew her mother had done something bad and wouldn't be living with them anymore. "Daddy?" Emma asked as she sorted papers into neat piles. "Why did Mommy take money from your company?" Derek paused in his work, considering how to answer. Emma deserved honesty appropriate to her age, but she also deserved protection from the full ugliness of what had happened. "Sometimes adults make bad choices," Derek said carefully. "Mommy made some bad choices because she was unhappy, and now she has to face the consequences." Emma nodded solemnly. "Will she get better?" "I hope so, sweetheart. That's why she's getting help from doctors who specialize in helping people who make bad choices." Tyler, now 10 and more aware of the situation's complexity, joined them in the study. "Dad," he said, "the kids at school are saying things about Mom, about her being in jail." Derek set down his pen and pulled his son close. "Tyler, what happened between your mother and me is between adults. She made mistakes and she's paying for them. But that doesn't change the fact that she loves you and Emma, even if she showed it poorly." "Are you going to get married again?" Tyler asked. Derek smiled. "Someday, perhaps, but right now, my focus is on you two and making sure our family is strong and stable." What Derek didn't tell his children was that Linda's confession had contained one final revelation, something that would ensure she never posed a threat to their family again. The psychological evaluation ordered by the court had revealed that Linda suffered from narcissistic personality disorder with antisocial traits. Combined with her embezzlement conviction, the diagnosis made her an unfit mother under state law. Derek's attorney had already filed for full custody, with supervised visitation being the best outcome Linda could hope for. But Derek's most devastating stroke had been his merger with Ashford Development Properties. By acquiring controlling interest in Robert's company, Derek had gained access to decades of financial records that revealed a pattern of questionable business practices, tax avoidance schemes, and ethical violations that bordered on criminal. Robert Ashford, the man who had considered Derek beneath his family standards, was now Derek's employee. Margaret Ashford's charity work had been exposed as a tax shelter that would likely result in civil penalties and social disgrace. The entire Ashford family legacy was now under Derek's control. 3 months after the barbecue that had changed everything, Derek stood in his expanded office overlooking a steel yard that had doubled in size. The walls displayed new contracts worth tens of millions of dollars, expansion plans for facilities in 2 additional states, and architectural drawings for the Morrison Steelworks corporate headquarters, a gleaming tower that would dominate the city skyline. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Linda's lawyer filed an appeal of the custody ruling. Judge denied it without consideration. She gets 4 hours supervised visitation per month pending completion of court-ordered treatment. Derek deleted the message and returned to his work. Linda had gambled with their marriage, their children's stability, and his life's work. She had lost everything. But Derek Morrison had built something stronger than revenge. He had constructed a new life on the ruins of betrayal. And like everything Derek built, it was designed to last forever. 6 months after Linda's arrest, Derek Morrison stood in the lobby of Morrison Steelworks' new corporate headquarters, a 30-story glass and steel monument to his success. The building dominated the city skyline, its modern architecture contrasting sharply with the older structures around it, much like Derek himself had always stood apart from the established order that had tried to diminish him. Emma and Tyler flanked him as they toured the executive floors, their eyes wide with amazement at their father's achievement. The children had adapted well to their new reality, especially once Derek had hired Maria Santos, a warm and competent housekeeper who provided the stability they needed during the transition. "This is your daddy's office," Derek explained to Emma as they entered the top-floor executive suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, while the walls displayed awards, contracts, and photographs documenting Derek's rise from a single welding truck to a regional construction empire. Tyler studied a framed newspaper article about the Morrison-Ashford merger. "Dad, are you really the biggest construction company in 3 states now?" Derek smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "We're certainly one of them, but more importantly, we employ over 400 people who can support their families because of the work we do." What Derek didn't mention was the phone call he'd received that morning from Linda's court-appointed attorney. Linda had completed her psychological evaluation and substance abuse counseling, and her lawyer was requesting expanded visitation rights. Derek had listened politely, then instructed his attorney to deny the request unless Linda agreed to additional conditions that would effectively ensure she remained powerless to disrupt their lives. The children didn't need to know that their mother was fighting desperately to regain any meaningful role in their lives. They also didn't need to know that Derek had no intention of allowing Linda to damage them further. That evening, Derek sat in his home study reviewing financial reports when Maria knocked on the door. "Mr. Morrison, there's a woman here to see you. She says she's Emma's teacher, Miss Peterson." Derek frowned. He hadn't scheduled any parent conferences, and the school typically called before sending teachers to students' homes. "Send her in, please." Sarah Peterson entered Derek's study with the nervous energy of someone who was clearly out of her comfort zone. She was younger than Derek had expected, mid-30s with auburn hair and intelligent green eyes that reminded him why he'd once been drawn to professional women. "Mr. Morrison, I apologize for coming by unannounced," Sarah began. "I tried calling your office, but they said you were working from home today." Derek gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Please, sit down. Is Emma having problems at school?" "Not problems exactly," Sarah replied, settling into the chair with obvious relief. "Emma is an exceptional student, bright, creative, and remarkably resilient given recent events. But I'm concerned about some of her recent artwork and writing assignments." Sarah pulled out a manila folder containing several of Emma's school projects. The drawings showed a family of 3, a father and 2 children, but the figures were often surrounded by dark colors and shadowy shapes. Emma's written several stories about families that are broken and children who have to protect their fathers from bad people, Sarah explained. She's clearly processing some complex emotions about her mother's absence. Derek studied his daughter's artwork, noting the careful way Emma had drawn protective barriers around the family figures. Even at 7, Emma understood that their family had been under attack, and that Derek had successfully defended them. "Miss Peterson," Derek said carefully, "Emma has been through a traumatic experience. Her mother's choices have disrupted her sense of security, but she's receiving counseling, and I've tried to maintain as much stability as possible." Sarah nodded sympathetically. "I understand, and I think you're handling a difficult situation very well. Emma speaks about you with obvious love and admiration, but I wanted to suggest that she might benefit from some creative outlets that allow her to express her feelings more constructively." Derek found himself studying Sarah Peterson more closely, Unlike Linda's calculated charm or the artificial sophistication of the Ashford women, Sarah had a genuine warmth that seemed unforced. When she smiled, it reached her eyes. "What did you have in mind?" Derek asked. "The school has an after-school art program that focuses on emotional expression through creative projects. Emma would work with other children who have experienced family transitions, and the program has an excellent success rate in helping children process their emotions." Derek considered the suggestion. Since Linda's departure, he'd been hyper-vigilant about protecting his children from further emotional damage, but he also recognized that Emma needed healthy ways to understand and express her feelings. "I'd like to visit the program before making a decision," Derek said. "Would that be possible?" Sarah's smile brightened. "Of course. In fact, if you're available Saturday morning, I'll be there setting up for the new semester. You could see the facilities and meet the other instructors." Derek found himself agreeing to the meeting, though he wasn't entirely sure why. Perhaps it was Sarah's genuine concern for Emma, or perhaps it was simply that he'd been isolated for months, focused entirely on his revenge and its aftermath. Saturday morning arrived crisp and clear, and Derek found himself walking through the elementary school's art wing with Sarah Peterson. The classrooms were bright and cheerful, filled with children's artwork that displayed a range of emotions, from joy to sadness to confusion. "We don't try to force positivity," Sarah explained as they toured the facilities. "Children need to process difficult emotions before they can move forward constructively." Derek paused before a display of family portraits created by children in the program. Some showed traditional nuclear families, others depicted single parents, and a few portrayed families that had been reconfigured by divorce or loss. "How long have you been teaching?" Derek asked. 8 years, Sarah replied. "I started after my own divorce. I wanted to work with children who were dealing with family changes because I understood what they were going through." Derek glanced at her, noting the absence of a wedding ring. "You have children?" "No," Sarah said softly. "That was one of the issues in my marriage. My ex-husband wanted children, but I was focused on my career. By the time I was ready, he'd moved on." Derek heard something in her voice. Regret, perhaps, or simply the acknowledgement of paths not taken. It was a feeling he understood, though his own regrets were more about trusting the wrong person than missing opportunities. "I'm sorry," Derek said, surprising himself with the genuine sympathy in his voice. Sarah smiled, though there was sadness in her eyes. "It worked out for the best. I love working with children, even if they're not my own. And my ex-husband remarried and has the family he wanted." They continued the tour, discussing the program's structure and Emma's potential participation. Derek found himself impressed by Sarah's professionalism and her obvious dedication to her students. As they concluded the visit, Sarah turned to Derek with a thoughtful expression. "Mr. Morrison, may I ask you something personal?" Derek nodded, curious. "Emma talks about you constantly, your work, your strength, how you protected the family. She clearly idolizes you. But I wonder, who protects you?" The question caught Derek off guard. For months, he'd been focused on being strong for his children, on building defenses against anyone who might threaten them. He hadn't considered that his own isolation might be noticeable to others. "I don't need protection," Derek replied automatically. Sarah's green eyes studied him with surprising intensity. "Everyone needs support, Mr. Morrison. Even successful businessmen who build empires and win custody battles." Derek felt something stir inside him, an emotion he hadn't experienced since before Linda's betrayal. Not attraction exactly, but connection. Sarah Peterson saw him not as a conquest or a stepping stone, but as a person who might need understanding. "Would you like to have coffee sometime?" Derek found himself asking, to discuss Emma's progress in the program. "Of course." Sarah's smile was warm and genuine. "I'd like that very much." As Derek drove home, he reflected on the unexpected encounter. For the first time in months, he'd met someone who seemed interested in him as a person rather than as a symbol of success or failure. But Derek Morrison had learned hard lessons about trust. If he was going to allow anyone new into his life and into his children's lives, it would be on his terms. with complete transparency about who he was and what he'd done to protect his family. Sarah Peterson would have to prove herself worthy of the Morrison family's trust, and Derek would ensure that she understood exactly what that meant. 3 weeks into Emma's participation in the art therapy program, Derek found himself looking forward to his Saturday morning conversations with Sarah Peterson. What had begun as discussions about Emma's progress had evolved into something more personal: coffee after the program sessions, long talks about their respective careers, and a gradually increasing comfort with each other's company. Sarah was unlike any woman Derek had known. Where Linda had been calculating and the Ashford women had been entitled, Sarah possessed a genuine warmth that seemed untouched by the cynicism that had marked Derek's recent experiences. She was also remarkably perceptive, often noticing details about Derek's behavior that he thought he'd hidden. "You're different when you talk about your work," Sarah observed during one of their coffee meetings. "Not just proud but protective, like you're defending something sacred." Derek considered her words carefully. He'd been deliberately vague about the specifics of his business expansion and the circumstances surrounding his divorce. But Sarah's insight suggested she understood more than she'd let on. "Morrison Steelworks is more than a business," Derek replied. "It represents everything I've built from nothing. Every contract, every employee, every successful project is proof that I can create something lasting." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "And when someone threatens that, you respond accordingly." Derek studied her face, looking for judgment or fear. Instead, he saw understanding, not approval necessarily, but comprehension of the motivation behind his actions. "I protect what matters to me," Derek said simply, "including Emma and Tyler, especially Emma and Tyler." Sarah was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee with deliberate care. "Derek, can I ask what really happened with your ex-wife?" Derek had been expecting this question for weeks. Sarah was too intelligent not to have noticed the gaps in his narrative, too observant not to have picked up on Emma's subtle references to protecting Daddy and keeping their family safe. "Linda made choices that threatened our children's stability," Derek replied. "I responded by ensuring she couldn't make those choices again." Sarah's green eyes met his directly. "That's what you did. I'm asking what she did to provoke it." Derek realized he was at a crossroads. He could continue deflecting Sarah's questions, maintaining the carefully constructed narrative that painted him as a wronged husband who'd simply divorced an unfaithful wife, or he could trust her with the truth about the depth of his planning and the ruthlessness of his revenge. "Linda conspired with her lover and her family to destroy me," Derek said finally. "They planned to take my children, my business, and my reputation. They saw me as a convenient target, someone they could manipulate and discard without consequences. So, you made sure there were consequences." Derek nodded. "I made sure they understood exactly what it costs to betray Derek Morrison." Sarah was quiet for several minutes, processing Derek's admission. Derek waited, prepared for her to make excuses and leave. Most people were uncomfortable with the reality of his methods, preferring to believe that justice always came through official channels and legal remedies. "How far did you go?" Sarah asked finally. Derek met her gaze steadily. "As far as necessary to protect my children and everything I'd built." Sarah nodded slowly. "And you'd do it again if someone threatened your family." Without hesitation, Sarah reached across the table and placed her hand over Derek's. "Good. Emma and Tyler deserve a father who will fight for them." Derek felt something shift inside him, a tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying since Linda's betrayal. Sarah's acceptance of his protective nature, her understanding that his methods had been necessary rather than excessive, validated choices he'd questioned during sleepless nights. "Most people would be horrified by what I did," Derek said. Sarah's smile was warm but knowing. "Most people have never had everything they love threatened by people they trusted. I have no illusions about what you're capable of, Derek. But I also see how gentle you are with Emma, how patient you are with Tyler, how hard you work to provide for them. You're not a monster. You're a man who refuses to be a victim." That evening, Derek sat in his study reviewing contracts for Morrison Steelworks' latest expansion when Tyler knocked on the door. "Dad, can I ask you something?" Derek set aside his papers and gestured for his son to enter. At 10, Tyler was developing his father's serious demeanor and analytical mind. He'd been remarkably resilient during the family upheaval, but Derek knew the boy was still processing the dramatic changes in their lives. "What's on your mind, son?" Tyler settled into the chair across from Derek's desk, unconsciously mimicking his father's posture. "The kids at school say their parents are talking about you, about how you got so rich so fast and what happened to Mom." Derek had been expecting this conversation. In a city the size of theirs, his rapid business expansion and Linda's dramatic fall from grace hadn't gone unnoticed. The merger with Ashford Development Properties had generated significant media attention, as had Linda's embezzlement conviction. "What are they saying?" Derek asked. Tyler shifted uncomfortably. "Some of them say you're really smart and really tough, but others say you're mean, that you hurt people who get in your way." Derek considered his response carefully. Tyler was old enough to understand complex concepts, but Derek wanted to provide guidance without burdening his son with adult responsibilities. "Tyler, what do you think makes a good man?" The boy thought for a moment. "Someone who keeps his promises. Someone who protects his family. Someone who works hard and treats people fairly." Derek nodded approvingly. "That's right. And when someone threatens the people you love, what should you do?" "Protect them," Tyler replied without hesitation, "even if other people think your methods are too harsh." Tyler met his father's gaze directly. "If someone was trying to hurt you or Emma, I'd stop them, whatever it took." Derek felt a surge of pride and concern. Tyler was developing the same protective instincts that had driven Derek's own actions. But Derek wanted his son to understand the weight of such choices. "Son, the ability to protect people you love is a strength, but it's also a responsibility. You have to be absolutely certain that the threat is real and that your response is necessary, because once you cross certain lines, you can't uncross them." Tyler nodded solemnly. "Did you cross lines, Dad?" Derek was quiet for a long moment, considering how to explain the complexity of his situation to a 10-year-old. "Yes," Derek said finally. "I did things that some people would consider wrong, but I did them to protect you and Emma from people who wanted to hurt our family. Do you regret it?" Derek looked at his son, healthy, confident, secure in his father's love and protection, and felt no uncertainty about his answer. "No, Tyler? I don't regret protecting my children." Tyler smiled with obvious relief. "Good, because I want to be like you when I grow up." After Tyler left, Derek returned to his work with a renewed sense of purpose. His methods had been harsh, but his results spoke for themselves. His children were safe, his business was thriving, and his enemies had been neutralized. Most importantly, he'd found someone who understood both his capacity for ruthlessness and his devotion to the people he loved. Derek picked up his phone and called Sarah Peterson. "Derek," Sarah's voice carried surprise. "Is everything all right?" "Would you like to have dinner tomorrow night?" Derek asked. "Somewhere nice. I think it's time we had a more serious conversation about the future." Sarah's silence lasted just long enough for Derek to wonder if he'd misread her signals. "I'd love to," Sarah replied finally. "But Derek, I need to know that you're ready for something real. Not just companionship or convenience, but an actual partnership." Derek smiled, appreciating her directness. "Sarah, I've spent months learning the difference between people who want something from me and people who want to build something with me. I know which category you're in." "And which category is that?" "The category of people worth protecting," Derek replied, "and worth trusting with everything that matters to me." 1 year after the barbecue that had changed everything, Derek Morrison stood in the reception hall of the Morrison Steelworks headquarters, surrounded by 400 employees, their families, and the business leaders who now considered him one of the most influential men in the region. The company's annual celebration had grown from a simple employee appreciation dinner to a major social event that drew politicians, contractors, and media representatives. Sarah Peterson stood beside him, elegant in a navy blue dress that complemented her auburn hair. Over the past 6 months, their relationship had deepened into something Derek had never experienced. A partnership based on mutual respect, shared values, and complete honesty about their pasts and expectations. Emma and Tyler flanked them, both children beaming with pride as they watched their father address the crowd. Emma's artwork from the therapy program now decorated the walls of Derek's home office, vibrant paintings that showed a family growing stronger rather than just surviving. Tyler had started working part-time at the steel yard during school breaks, learning the business from the ground up as Derek had always intended. "Friends, colleagues, family," Derek began, his voice carrying easily through the hall. "When I started Morrison Steelworks 23 years ago, I had a simple goal: to build something that would last, something that would provide good jobs, reliable service, and lasting value to our community." Derek paused, his gaze moving across the faces of people whose lives had been touched by his work. Many of his original employees were still with the company, now holding supervisory positions and training the next generation of steelworkers. Today, Morrison Steelworks employs over 400 people across 4 states. We've built schools, hospitals, office buildings, and homes that will shelter families for generations. But our greatest achievement isn't measured in tonnage of steel or dollars of revenue. It's measured in the strength of the community we've built together. The applause was warm and genuine. Derek had earned these people's respect not through fear or manipulation, but through consistent fairness, generous compensation, and unwavering loyalty to those who worked hard and treated him honestly. As the evening progressed, Derek found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this moment. Linda's betrayal had nearly destroyed him, but it had also revealed his true strength. The ordeal had stripped away his illusions about trust and forced him to distinguish between people who deserved his loyalty and those who would exploit it. Robert Ashford approached Derek during the cocktail hour, his presence a stark reminder of how completely the tables had turned. Now, a minority partner in Derek's expanding empire, Robert was financially secure but powerless, exactly the position Derek had intended. "Congratulations on another successful year," Robert said stiffly, the words clearly painful to speak. Derek nodded graciously. "Thank you, Robert. I trust Margaret is enjoying her volunteer work at the community center." Derek's question carried subtle significance. After Margaret's charity scandal had destroyed her social standing, Derek had arranged for her to find meaningful volunteer work with organizations that actually helped people, rather than serving as tax shelters for the wealthy. It was both merciful and controlling, allowing Margaret to rebuild her reputation while ensuring she remained under Derek's influence. "She's adjusting to the change," Robert replied carefully. Derek's smile was warm, but carried an unmistakable reminder of power dynamics. Change can be difficult, but it often leads to personal growth. "I'm glad she's finding purpose in genuine service." After Robert retreated, Sarah appeared at Derek's side with 2 glasses of champagne. "That was unnecessarily cruel," she observed, though her tone carried more amusement than criticism. Derek accepted his champagne with a slight smile. "Robert made his choices. I'm simply ensuring he lives with the consequences while maintaining the appearance of reconciliation for the children's sake." Sarah raised her glass. "A toast to building something that lasts." Derek touched his glass to hers, appreciating both the toast and the woman who understood his methods without condemning them. 2 partnerships that strengthen over time. Later that evening, Derek stood on the balcony of his penthouse office, looking out over the city lights that stretched to the horizon. Morrison Steelworks logo glowed from the top of the building, a beacon visible for miles, a monument to what could be achieved through determination, intelligence, and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. His phone buzzed with a text message. The number was unfamiliar, but Derek recognized the area code from the psychiatric facility where Linda was completing her extended treatment program. The message was brief. "I know you're reading this. I want to see my children. I've changed. Please give me a chance to prove it." Derek deleted the message without responding, as he had deleted dozens of similar messages over the past year. Linda's lawyers had exhausted their legal options for expanded visitation rights. Her family's influence had been neutralized. Her attempts to generate sympathy through media interviews had backfired when reporters discovered the full extent of her crimes. Derek's phone rang immediately, Linda calling from the facility's patient phone. He answered on the third ring. "Hello, Linda." Linda's voice was shaky but determined. "Derek, please. I know I hurt you, but Tyler and Emma are my children too. I'm getting better. The doctors say you're learning to manage your personality disorder," Derek interrupted calmly. "That's not the same as being cured, and it's certainly not the same as being trustworthy." "I made mistakes," Linda pleaded, "but I'm their mother. They need stability, security, and protection from people who would use them as weapons," Derek replied. "They need to know that their father will always put their welfare above social expectations or legal technicalities." Derek's voice remained steady, but Linda could hear the steel underneath. "You conspired to destroy their family for your own selfish purposes. You embezzled money from the company that provides for them. You chose your affair over their emotional well-being. Those weren't mistakes, Linda. They were choices that revealed your true character." "People can change," Linda whispered. "Perhaps," Derek acknowledged, "but some changes come too late to repair the damage already done. You had 15 years to choose our family over your own desires. You chose differently, and now you live with the consequences." Derek ended the call and blocked the number as he had blocked all previous attempts at contact. He'd given Linda multiple opportunities to prioritize their children's needs over her own wants. She'd failed every test, and Derek had no intention of giving her additional chances to damage Tyler and Emma. The balcony door opened behind him, and Sarah stepped outside, wrapping her arms around Derek's waist. "Linda?" she asked softly. Derek nodded, leaning back against Sarah's warmth. "The same conversation we've had dozens of times. She wants another chance to prove she's changed." "And you said?" "I said that some consequences are permanent." Derek turned in Sarah's arms, studying her face in the city lights. "Do you think I'm being too harsh?" Sarah considered the question seriously before answering. "I think you're being protective. Linda had 15 years to choose her family over her own interests. She chose differently every time it mattered." Derek kissed Sarah's forehead, grateful for her understanding. Unlike Linda, Sarah had never asked Derek to compromise his principles or soften his methods. She understood that his ruthlessness was the flip side of his loyalty, that the same qualities that made him dangerous to his enemies made him absolutely reliable to those he loved. "Have I told you lately that I love you?" Derek asked. Sarah smiled, the expression transforming her face with warmth and affection. "Not since this morning, but I love you too. All of you, including the parts that other people find intimidating." Derek held her close, looking out over the city he'd helped build and the empire he'd constructed from ambition and determination. In the distance, he could see the lights of construction sites where Morrison Steelworks crews were building the foundations of tomorrow's skyline. His phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "Dad, Emma wants to know if we can help you with the new project plans tomorrow. She has ideas about making buildings that are both strong and beautiful." Derek smiled, typing back, "Tell Emma that strong and beautiful is exactly what we're building. And yes, we always need good ideas from the Morrison family engineering team." Sarah read the message over his shoulder. "They're lucky to have you as a father." Derek's expression grew serious. "They're the reason for everything I've built and everything I've done. Every decision I make is measured against one standard. What's best for Tyler and Emma's future?" "And what do you think is best for their future?" Derek looked out at the city lights, then back at the woman in his arms, a woman who understood his methods, shared his values, and loved his children as if they were her own. "A father who keeps his promises," Derek replied. "A family that can't be broken by outside forces, and the knowledge that some people in this world can be trusted completely, while others must be handled with extreme caution." Sarah nodded, understanding the deeper meaning. Derek Morrison had built an empire on the principle that loyalty should be rewarded and betrayal should be punished. It was a simple philosophy, but one that had created lasting success and unshakable security for the people he loved. As they stood together on the balcony of Derek's tower, overlooking a city where his influence extended far beyond steel and construction, Derek Morrison knew that he had achieved something far more valuable than wealth or power. He had built a foundation strong enough to last forever, one based on absolute loyalty to those who deserved it, and absolute ruthlessness toward those who did not. Linda would spend the rest of her life learning the difference, and Derek Morrison would spend the rest of his life ensuring that the people he loved never had to make that distinction for themselves. The Steel Emperor had won his war, and his victory was measured not in the destruction of his enemies, but in the unshakable strength of everything he had built to protect. This is where our story comes to an end. Derek Morrison's empire, his family, and the deep foundation of loyalty and love he created would stand as a testament to his determination and resolve for generations to come.